So there's a powerful quote from the authors Craig Marundi and Tim Flanagan found in their book, Becoming a Conflict Competent Leader, that claims the better able team members are to engage, speak, listen, hear, interpret, and respond constructively, the more likely teams are to leverage conflict rather than be leveled by it. This quote encompasses so many important communication concepts that can be used together to build a strong and well-united team. So we know that conflict is inevitable. Conflict management, especially in the workplace, is an essential skill to adapt. Learning how to clearly and effectively communicate with colleagues and supervisors will prevent bigger problems from arising. My name is Charlee McCall, and I'm a speech communications student at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. By submitting this assignment, I acknowledge that this work is completely my own. As someone who experienced conflict with their boss and was still promoted, I can attest that conflict in the workplace can be resolved. In fact, conflict teaches us to have the courage to voice our opinions and the discipline to sit and listen to others with an open mind. Today, I'm going to share a conflict moment between my boss and I. First, I will give you the case background of my conflict. Second, I will provide communication concept and two communication principles. And finally, I will provide recommendations. So let's start with this story. I started working at Western Sizzlin in April of 2015. I was hired as a 15-year-old, so it was my first job. I didn't have much experience. I was really fond of my boss, and he was generally pretty good at working with my schedule so that I could still have fun in high school and prioritize academics and do extracurriculars. But he wanted us to be fully focused on the success of his restaurant when we were there. I was promoted pretty fast from cashier to server within the first 6 months, I'd say. But I decided to get a second job that summer so I could save money for a new car. And my brother told me about a opening at a restaurant that he worked at for a hostess. And so I designed my schedules so I could work there in the morning and go to Western Sizzlin at night. And one night, it was a Saturday, we were exceptionally busy, and I was splitting a party room with another server, and one of the customers their steak had been messed up and they asked for it to be recooked. So I picked up his plate and I walked it to the station and I asked the other server to handle it, because I had something to finish for another table. And somewhere between the customer and the cook, the order was miscommunicated again, and the steak was delivered wrong again. And so since we messed up the order twice, it was understandable for the man to be angry. And so he asked to speak with the manager. And after the situation was resolved, my boss still asked me to come into his office to speak with him. And so I explained the miscommunication. It was very obvious that he was upset. He began to yell, his voice was raising. He was like stern, his arms were crossed, his eyes were fixed, his face was red. It was very obvious that he was upset. And I think this is when the conflict moment actually happened, because he never called in the second server. It was just me. And the way he handled it, I felt almost attacked in a way, because he was just so upset. And it was the first time I'd really ever made a mistake. And so, I was apologetic. And at the end of the day, we were able to get through it and apologize. But I had to sit there and think, do I want to say something about how this made me feel now and risk making him more upset and losing my job? Or do I want to just let it go and risk him talking to me like this again? And so now that I've shared my case background, I will show you how a silly conflict can be linked to communication. And so the relevant communication principle is that communication behaviors are learnable. And the definition of that, as defined by the Euler's Survival Guide, is though the process of communication is constant and inevitable, the behaviors of this process are not. Thus, you can learn to communicate in particular ways that will positively or negatively impact the situation. And I think this is pretty relevant because I was 15 or 16 at the time, and so it's kind of hard to remember what exactly was said so far back, but basically I just didn't really know how to react in a conflict moment, especially one in the workplace. And so the fact that it's okay that communication is learnable is really kind of reassuring. But the first communication concept is nonverbal communication. Like I said, it was just so obvious that he was upset. And nonverbal communication, as defined by the textbook, is the process of generating meaning using behavior other than words. So you could tell that he was upset not only by the words he was using, but by the tone of his voice, the just how he was standing, how his eyes were fixed on me, how his skin was really red. And so that was just kind of in the story. And then also the second communication concept in the story was primary emotion. And this was just how I reacted. And these are defined by the textbook as innate emotions that are experienced for short periods of time and appear rapidly. So even though I hate to admit it, I did cry a little bit because it was the first time that I had to deal with this, and it was pretty overwhelming. And so, yeah, that was just the primary emotion coming out. So finally, I'll provide recommendations that could help communication. Based on my experience, I can use communication concepts and ethical implications to improve my communication and help improve my interpersonal relationships. So one communication concept I could use to improve communication would just be learning to take criticism in a constructive way. And so criticism is the expression or disapproval of someone or something based on perceived fault or mistake. And I chose this because it is true that sometimes it's hard to hear criticism, especially because you don't want to think that you did something wrong, but it is true that I did make a mistake. I should have handled the situation myself. However, the way he came at me, it kind of made me more defensive when I could have taken what he had to say to heart and maybe learned from it. And then the ethical implication I could use to improve my interpersonal relationships is fairness. The definition as defined by the Euler Survival Guide 2019 is considering all sides of a situation without showing favor to our own interests. I chose this specifically because of when he didn't call the other server in, it made me feel unfair. And so I was being treated unfairly. So I want to treat others with fairness because I wasn't, and it the moment it led to. And so I can use this implication to improve my interpersonal relationships by reflection of important communication moments and can add this into my communication toolbox. So in conclusion, I have told you about a conflict moment between my boss and myself. I linked it to communication and provided some recommendations for communication. It was an important moment for my professional career because it taught me that workplace relationships can have hiccups like any other relationship. In fact, we should expect them. I'm really glad that I was able to work things out with my boss, and since this conflict, I've been promoted. And I know that my boss truly has the best interests at heart for me. And it was just a bad day for us both. So I chose this conflict because he's been one of the most influential people in my life despite the altercation. And just as Runde and Flanagan suggest, learning how to effectively communicate will help us overcome conflict that arises.